Hello everybody and welcome to this talk today with myself, Penelope Milner, and I'll be in conversation with Fatimah Mahmood. And today we'll be talking about empowering youth through education to overcome the climate crisis. So thank you so much for joining us today, Fatimah, and thank you to everyone in the audience who is tuning in today. Fatimah is the current Programme Manager for the Green Box, and she is also a Local Pathways Fellow with the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. So I'm really looking forward to talking to you today. Just a brief introduction to myself. I'm a geography student at the University of Leeds, and I have a really keen interest in climate change, which is why I've got involved with the talks today. So the way that the session will work is that I'll hand over to Fatimah now for an introduction about the work that she's doing, and then we'll go to some questions. So I'll hand over to you, Fatimah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Penelope, and hello everybody. I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening in from. I'm so glad to be here at the Festival for Change. And so diving right into the topic for today, I am going to start by answering two really important questions, which will set the context of our conversation. So the first one is, why is there so much emphasis on young people, empowering young people? And the answer to that is that around half of the world's population currently is under the age of 30 years old, right? And apart from the statistical value, these are the very same individuals who are going to be living through the consequences of the decisions, the action, and also the inaction that the world takes. On the other hand, they're expected to be the bearers of change, to step into roles that previously probably didn't exist or are transforming very radically. The just transition that we talk about into greener economies, or adapting to a changing climatic world, or just sustainable lifestyles in general. All of these things require us or people to change. And so naturally, it takes us to the next query. How do we ensure that this huge chunk of population that we have, how do we make sure that they're an asset for us in our fight against the climate crisis? And that is simple. It's simple, yet it's the most underrated solution there is out there. It's provision of education that is targeted, that is relevant, that is correct. And then capacity building through development of skills, whether it's technical competencies or just soft skills that people need for this change. And layered with engagement opportunities for young people to engage with peers, with mentors, or people among the stakeholders in the community or stakeholders in power. And you can have all these fancy technologies and have the greenest policies and programs, but they will fail to sustain if you do not back it up with people or human resource and acceptability within the community to uphold those commitments. And we've seen that through our organization. Young people these days are quite aware and sensitized about the impacts of climate change. However, where they lack is that they're ill-equipped to kind of unpack the complexities that surround this crisis, and they do not have the correct competencies to be part of the solution, whether that's adaptation, mitigation, or even communicating climate change. And I feel like this is where organizations like ours kind of steps in, identifies these gaps, researches, and uses our expertise to develop resources, whether it's educational materials, holding trainings and workshops, engaging young people, and then guiding them, supporting them to take that knowledge and skills that they've developed and transform them into on-ground climate action within their communities. And just to quickly, before I end this introductory part, I'd like to give an example. Now, at the Green Box, these past couple of months, we were developing a guide, COP 101, for young people before COP 26 started. And what our aim was to, through this, using language, using information, or presenting it in such a way that it was very easy for young people to kind of decode the impacts, the science of climate change, And then more about climate negotiations, the social impacts, such as vulnerable populations, the importance of Global South, and of course, how youth can be part of this cause. And not only did we receive such positive feedback from people who benefited from this guide, but this kind of started off as a conversation starter for us, and we got to train more than 50 young leaders in Pakistan across the country on the basics of climate negotiations. We told them about the importance of youth diplomacy and had such a wholesome conversation around why we care about climate change or what our expectations are from COP. And then beyond COP, how can we as youth really put into this cause, right? And it was just the beginning for all of us. And so through this example, you can really see how this singular product really kind of has this ripple effect within our communities to bring about change. And so I'm going to end with that and pass it back to Penelope so we can move on to the Q&A part. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Fatima. So yes, if anyone has any questions, do keep them coming on the comment chat box, and it will be really interesting to hear your thoughts on that. Yes, thank you everyone for joining us this morning. So I just wanted, from what you've just said, and you were training these 50 young people to be, these global leaders, and that sounds fantastic. And I was just wondering, what is the work that they're kind of doing now to follow up on that? Are they kind of going into the community? Do you have like more initiatives to kind of get more people involved?
Yeah, so definitely this was kind of a start for all of us, and we weren't emphasizing on people, having that background knowledge on climate even. So at the beginning, this is definitely a kind of having all these people who are now really motivated to go out in their communities, right? Now we have this networking together. And so I think this is a start, and definitely we're going to be working on more climate and awareness campaigns, and then go back to the community and see where they are needed in terms of adapting or creating more resilient communities.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's quite interesting because you're trying to get out into the community and get your word out, and I suppose it's like filtering through. So I really hope that you can do more with this program and kind of have it in lots of different communities, so that you can really get your message out there.
We live in a bubble sometimes that we don't realize that beyond our circle there is a community which is not aware of these climate change impacts, or even the impacts that they will be feeling very soon. So it's important to ensure that across the country we have these leaders that can not only network with the experts, but then go back to their communities and pass the knowledge on, pass those skills on according to the local context that they are over there.
Yeah. Do you think in terms of not only communicating about this program, but communicating about climate change and the climate crisis in general, do you kind of find some like challenges with that, especially because of the pandemic? Is there any things that you think kind of need resolving, and kind of problems that need answers to in regard to that?
Definitely, when I look at the context of Pakistan, right? And like I said, that there are the major communities that are at the front line are not really aware how they're going to be impacted. They might be experiencing those things, but vulnerability comes from the lack of resilience. And the fact is that right now, I feel like talking or communicating about climate change is within this certain community, even in our country, right? A lot of the larger population is unaware of this. And so it's important to infiltrate there, And a lot of these concepts that we have, a lot of literature that we have on climate change we need to localize it for our context, because if it's not relatable to people, making it relatable is quite a challenge, because for people who don't consider the environment or climate change as an issue, as a basic need, then it's difficult for them to understand why they need to work on it, whether it's to adapt or, just the impacts that they will be feeling. So just making them understand this is really difficult.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. That's kind of one of those challenges that probably needs to be worked upon, so that we can try and, not only in Pakistan but in countries all over the world where there's probably more isolated communities that aren't aware of this. So yeah, that's something that definitely needs to be tackled. So next we have a question from Henry Dev Sangor, and he asks, what are you thinking in terms of next steps to build on the training of the 50 leaders pre-COP?
Yeah, so definitely our aim is to, now that we have these people on board, the next steps are to really be working on skill development. And the focus is basically for them to first go back to their communities and really understand where our work is needed, right? And then, like I said, using that context that we have, then we will build up on the skills that they will need. Now, apart from this, since we're really advocating towards inclusion of young people in policy making, in decision making as well. So it's really important that we have these people to be knowledgeable about negotiations, about the fact that beyond science, there are numerous battles that need to be fought, right? And so having that local context of communities, having a network across the country where obviously as an individual or just as a singular organization, we don't have that outreach. Having these people from across the country will ensure that we have that outreach, that we are giving away the message of climate change, of the different impacts that will be created from it. So definitely in terms of networking, I believe that's our next step, to ensure that we are really building up on these people who can then go into their communities.
Amazing, thank you. Yes, and I hope that you're really successful with that in your work. So we've got another question here from Nicolette Bota. Nicolette says, fantastic work, Fatima and the Green Box. And what sorts of climate information and know-how is most relevant and empowering for young people?
Great. So first of all, thank you so much for your compliment and your question as well. Now, I believe that generally speaking, climate change has become, or the climate crisis has become such an issue where people feel a lot of negative emotions attached to it. And in empowering, it is important for us to make sure that young people understand that they are part of the solution, that they're empowered enough to make a difference. We always look towards our leaders, we always look towards adults to make that change, for us to limit climate change. But this is a whole of a society crisis, and young people need to know that they are part of the solution. And for this, it's important for them to not only understand the impacts, but then to understand how can they make a difference, right? How can they be skilled enough, whether, for example, just talking about attaining sustainable lifestyles. Young people need to be aware of the different options they have, right? They need to have those technical competencies to be able to go into, in the future or even in the present, and go into these work positions or even the careers that they're in. How are they going to transform those into more greener ones or sustainable ones? So it's important that we provide them with the information that how can they channelize their negative emotions or disappointments that we see so often. How can we channelize them into positive impact on ground? And you do not need a lot of resources for it. Just like in the introduction, I was telling you about the knowledge project or the guide that we created. It was a very simple product, but it kind of initiated this chain of reaction that it made people really talk about it, right? Talk about climate change. And even that was a success to start off with. So just making sure that you're empowering young people towards positive impact is really important, I think.
Lovely, thank you for that. Just to kind of follow up on those points, I was just wondering then, do you think that this is something that we educate people through formally in education, young people, or do you think this is something that's more community-based, or maybe a mix of both? What do you think will be the most effective approach?
Yeah. So, I mean, definitely it has to be a mix of both, right? But I feel like making it more formally or introducing it into school curriculum definitely has a greater outreach. I'll just give you an example. In Pakistan, they are currently developing a single national curriculum for across the country, which means that wherever you are, whether you're in a rural setting or an urban setting, you are going to be following a single national curriculum. And so at the Green Box, what we did was that we kind of explored these drafts that they're developing, and we were kind of trying to gauge how much of these themes of climate change and biodiversity or sustainability were being integrated into the curriculum. And when we found the results, we saw that like more than 50 to 60% either had low focus or no focus on these themes. And so what now we're advocating on is that it's important that we incorporate the Sustainable Development Goals, climate action, all of these things within the national curriculum. And with this, we will have these certain standards or learning objectives, which each and every school will have to follow. But obviously, there are some restraints in this as well, because you need quite a lot of resources to mainstream these things, and these kind of and they're different across the country. So again, I'll go back to my point about localizing the context, right? And then localizing the context, and then ensuring that you have you work around the resources that you have. But in terms of your question, I would say that it has to be both, but including it in the school or education curriculum definitely has a greater outreach than just having, pockets of individual workshops and trainings. But layering it together will definitely be having a greater impact overall.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think it is really important to combine both of those, especially when, there's lots of different people from different communities that you're trying to appeal to. I think I've just found in general with climate education, a lot of the time, young people are just kind of given this knowledge, given all of these things that they're obviously going to be very worried and concerned about. And then there isn't necessarily anything that they can then do to use that knowledge and make an impact. So, I think it's like giving people the appropriate kind of next steps that they can do with that knowledge so that they can make a difference rather than just sort of sitting on it. So yeah, that's
really action oriented. Make children like problem solvers, right? Instead of just looking at the issues, they need to be problem solvers so they can talk about solutions as well. Yeah,
definitely. I think that's a really good point. So on screen now, I'll just pop another question that we've had come in. And Henry Levesingle asks, what issues around climate change do you find resonates most with young Pakistanis?
Right. So definitely, I'd say that being a vulnerable country, we're in the top 10 most vulnerable countries to climate change, right? And so young people really connect to that. They know that this is an issue that is going to be really affecting our country in the future, and this is something that we didn't really play a part in, right? A lot of this is to do with the developed countries more. And so I feel like young people in Pakistan feel like they need to start really thinking of the solutions, right? They're very passionate about it, and they want to change. They want to change from the current situation, and they want to ensure that whatever impacts of climate change that are going to occur, that we are ready for it. And I even during the training that we had so many of these concerns that rose up about the fact that they were really disappointed with the outcomes of COP and in the previous years as well, right? And so coming from that, we thought that it's really important to not only network with like-minded people, but to go on ground and make sure that people who are most vulnerable are aware of these issues and are prepared enough to be, and are resilient enough to then tackle climate change. So yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, I think, and I'm really pleased to hear as well that you found when you're doing a lot of these workshops and talks that, you know, people are really passionate about finding the solutions, and rather than focusing on the problem, they're focusing on the answer, which I think is a really, you know, really important thing to do. I'll just pop on screen now. We've had another question come through from Henry, and he asks, do you think understanding the impact of economic systems on driving the climate crisis is an area that young people need to understand more about?
Yes, definitely. I feel like I said, even in the introduction, that beyond the science, where I feel like it should end, people need to understand that there's a lot of complexity around this issue, right? And we need to make these things more, we need to highlight these things more, you know, not only the economic point of view, but also the social impacts as well. And then, of course, as we, I've also worked on, you know, sort of kind of gauging how in the future, since we will be transitioning towards greener economies, it's then important to obviously highlight and identify the different skills that they will require to fill up those positions. And so definitely, like you said, economic systems, and also them being their role in carrying forward this, and carrying this forward in greener economies. What are the skills that they will need in the future, or also in the present, but also all the issues, all the impacts that climate change itself has on the economy of the country. I mean, we're already going through such a difficult time right now, even with the pandemic and otherwise as well. It's important that young people understand that climate change is going to worsen these impacts. And so it is important for them to kind of be prepared in advance on how they need to shift their mindsets, their behaviors, the kind of technical skills that they will be needing for the future economic growth.
Brilliant, thank you. Do you think this is something then that will probably be, in terms of economic knowledge and driving these green economies? Do you think that's something that you will look at in Green Box?
Yeah, I mean, on a personal level, I was also part of this report that we kind of did for UNDP Pakistan, where we were seeing how we did a horizon scan for green jobs for women in Pakistan, right? And through that, we not only identified all the different jobs that there could be for women in the green economy, but then we went ahead and we looked at the skills, whether they were the technical skills or the soft skills that they will be requiring. And of course, that was just the first step, right? The next step obviously is to then not only engage this population, but make sure that we train them in the relevant skills. You know, coming from a country where sometimes in some of the regions, the literacy levels are already low, it is important for us to understand that we need to start from the bottom at times, you know. For example, I'll just give you an example. If you can't just introduce someone to start monitoring using technological devices or computers if they don't have digital literacy to begin with, right? So it's a long process, but we don't have the time. You know, we're running out of time in terms of adapting to this or you know, towards the greener economy. So it's important that we both leapfrog and also make sure that we have our human resource in time with the resources, with the literacy levels that we have, and make do with those.
Yeah, I think that's part of the the problem in a way is that you've got to kind of try and overcome these. And we're lucky today, and we're in completely different countries, and we're able to talk to each other via technology. But for some people, that just isn't an option. And I suppose, yeah, it's a case of it's the only way that, especially in more isolated areas, that they'll hear about this is through people actively going into their communities and talking to them. And that's something, I suppose, that we really have to talk about, because I think we kind of have this perception that the world, we're all kind of really interconnected now, and we the distance between us is a lot smaller in a way, enabled by all this technology. So yeah, I suppose.
Also, the solutions we all talk about. For example, there's so much emphasis on electric cars and stuff like that. But you can't use the same thing in all these countries. The contexts are so different between the global south, the global north, or even within my country, right? Being in the capital city is very different from being in a small rural town. So it's really important to understand that there are different conditions, and we must work towards it. We should move away from these big fancy things and really talk about the small activities or small projects that we can work on, which will require less resources. And I had this study that I read a few days ago, and it said that if only 16% of high school students in higher middle income countries were to receive targeted climate education, we could reduce 19 gigatons of carbon dioxide by 2050. And that is equivalent to if we only invest in concentrated solar power. So you can just imagine the impact of just educating people. And it doesn't require all that technology, right? I can go into my country using the resources that I have and just communicate to people, and it's going to make a difference. So you can just see how much impact just educating people can have.
Yeah, wow, I had no idea there was like that much impact that educating people can have. That's amazing. I'm really pleased to hear that. I think we're kind of drawn to the end of the presentation now, but we've had a question here from Nicolette Bota, and she asks, how can young climate vulnerable people better speak truth to the powerful institutions that constrain change?
Yeah, so I really believe that everyone has personal strengths, right? And since I really promote education and skill development, I believe that young people, it's their responsibility to be educated about climate issues. Because once you're educated about something, you are at a better position to then go out there and talk to any of the stakeholders. And I will kind of take this from the fellowship that I'm doing as well with Local Pathways Fellowship for SDSN-Youth Network. Now, this was a 10-month kind of fellowship where I had to develop a project. And starting off, I obviously knew the basics of the issues and at hand, but I couldn't just go and talk to any of the stakeholders in the city and demand them to do something. But now that I've developed my project, now that I am more informed about it, I can then go ahead and tell and talk to people in the stakeholders in power or like-minded organizations, and I can tell them, look, I have this data, I have this information, and I want to work on the solutions. So it's really important for you to be educated about the issues and know it inside out, because then you will have the confidence, you will have the backing to realistically think about it. You will know all the constraints that they are, and you can then go and talk to powerful institutions, people in power, and tell them that I have evidence to show you, and I know how we can move ahead with it in terms of solutions as well. So yeah, that's what I think it is.
Brilliant. So I suppose the key really is educating people, and that's kind of, a really big step that we need to take, is ensuring that globally people are more aware of this and more educated. So brilliant. Thank you so much. I didn't know whether there was a message that you'd like to leave on just before we close the presentation.
Yeah, I just, like I said just right now, I think every single person has a personal strength. And no matter who you are, whether you're an introvert, an extrovert, a scientist, a painter, we have influence, okay? Even if you can influence one person today, it will make a difference in the climate crisis. So, go ahead and, be educated and then spread that awareness. So because with power comes the responsibility to then, share it forward. So yeah.
Amazing, thank you. That's a really lovely note to leave the presentation on. So for anyone that wants to find out more about the Green Box and the work they're doing and the COP101 guide that they've developed, we've just popped those links in the chat there for you. And yes, thank you for your questions from Nicolette Bota and Henry Leveson Gore. Thank you so much to everyone for tuning in this morning. And thank you in particular to Fatimah for being here with us this morning. It's been lovely to have you. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much.